Okay, hey, I am Sass. I'm with Resources for Organizing and Social Change and continuing reading Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler this week. Um, and just before I even get into my recap, a little trigger warning for folks who don't do well with descriptions of graphic violence and sexual assault. If that's you, this story is probably not for you. It is a post-apocalyptic tale with lots of that stuff. And so with that said, I'm going to give a brief recap just to catch us up to where we are in the story. Just as a reminder, we are in a post-apocalyptic world. We're set in the 2020s. At this point in the story, we're in like later 2020s. There is terrible violence with robbery and lots of killing and sexual assault. And the person we're following in the story is named Lauren, who is an older teenager that has something called hyper empathy, which she calls sharing when it happens. If somebody's around her who is in a lot of pleasure or pain, she actually feels it physically, which means that if she gets into a fight with somebody and lands a blow, she feels it too. So in this, by the time where we are in the story now, her entire family has been killed, and the community that she came from was recently burned and pillaged, and so she's traveling north toward Canada from where she was coming from, which was a town in California called Robledo. She is with two folks from the community that she came from named Harry and Zara, who are romantically involved, and they are also traveling with a small family of three named Travis, Natividad, and a baby named Dominic. And the developments that we had in the story last week are that they continued traveling north looking for a place with arable land and near potable water. And they are intending to start a new community called Earthseed, where the expectation will be to basically expect change and to survive through reciprocity of protecting each other. And along the way, they ended up meeting three new people who joined their group. It was an older person named Bankoli, who Lauren appears to maybe be attracted to, and two sisters who are in their 20s, whose names are Allie and Jill. And we left off where Bankoli was considering the purchase of a gun. And so with that, I am going to share my screen for folks who process information better by seeing it as well as hearing it. So here we go. And let me just make sure that I am on the first part of page 242, which is where we left off. Oh, I gotta move my screen a little bit. And let's see. Okay. While Bankoli haggled with the man over the rifle, I bought the pots from the woman. I would get Bankoli to carry them in his cart. They were large enough to contain soup or stew or hot cereal for all of us at once. We were 9 now, and bigger pots made sense. Then I joined Harry at the stack of books. There was no nonfiction. I bought a fat anthology of poetry, and Harry bought a Western novel. The others, either from lack of money or from lack of interest, ignored the books. I would have bought more if I could have carried them. My pack was already about as heavy as I thought I could stand and still walk all day. Our bargaining finished. We stood away from the table to wait for Bankoli, and Bankoli surprised us. He got the old man down to a price he seemed to think was fair. Then he called us over. Any of you know how to handle a relic like this, he asked. Well, Harry and I did, and he had us look the rifle over. In the end, everyone had a look at it, some with the obvious awkwardness and some with familiarity. Back in the neighborhood, Harry and I had practiced with the guns of other households, rifles and shotguns as well as handguns. Whatever was legal back home was shared, at least in practice sessions. My father had wanted us to be familiar with whatever weapons might be available. Harry and I were both good, competent shots, but we'd never bought a used gun. I liked the rifle. I liked the look and feel of it, but that didn't mean much. Harry seemed to like it too. Same problem. Come over here, Bancoli said. He herded us out of earshot of the old couple. You should buy that gun, he told us. You took enough money off those 4 junkies to pay the price I got that guy to agree to. You need at least one accurate long-range weapon, and this is a good one. That money would buy a lot of food, Travis said. Bancoli nodded. Yes, but only living people need food. You buy this and it will pay for itself the first time you need it. Anyone who doesn't know how to use it, I'll teach. My father and I used to hunt deer with guns just like this. It's an antique, Harry said. If it were automatic, you couldn't afford it. Bancoli shrugged. This thing is cheap because it's old and it's legal. And it's slow, Zara said. And if you think that old guy's price is cheap, you're crazy. I know I'm new here, Allie said, but I agree with Bancoli. You guys are good with handguns, but sooner or later you're going to meet someone who sits out of handgun range and picks us off. And this rifle is going to save us? Zara demanded. I doubt that it would save us, I said, but with a decent shot behind it, it might give us a chance. I looked at Bancoli. You hit any of those deer? He smiled. 1 or 2. I did not return the smile. Why don't you buy the rifle for yourself? I can't afford it, he said. I've got enough money to keep me going and take care of necessities for a while. Everything else that I had was stolen from me or burned. I didn't quite believe him, but then no one knew how much money I had either. In a way, I suppose he was asking about our solvency. Did we have enough money to spend an unexpected windfall on an old rifle? And what did he intend to do if we did? I hoped, not for the first time, that he wasn't just a handsome thief. Yet I did like the gun, and we do need it. Harry and I are decent shots too, I said to the group. I like the feel of this gun, and it's the best we can afford right now. Has anyone seen any real trouble with it? They looked at one another. No one answered. It just needs a cleaning and some 30-06 ammunition, Bancoli said. It's been stored for a while, but it appears to have been well maintained. If you buy it, I think I can manage to buy a cleaning kit and some ammunition. At that, I spoke up before anyone else could. If we buy, that's a deal. Who else can handle the rifle? I can, Natividad said. And when that won her a few surprised looks, she said, I had no brothers. My father needed to teach someone. We never had a chance to do any shooting, Allie said, but we can learn. Jill nodded. I always wanted to learn, she said. I'll have to learn too, Travis admitted. Where I grew up, guns were either locked away or carried by hired guards. Let's go buy it then, I said. And let's get out of here. The sun will be down soon. Bancoli kept his word, bought cleaning things and plenty of ammunition, insisted on buying them before we left town because, as he said, who knows when we'll need it or when we'll find other people willing to sell it to us. Once that was settled, we left town. As we left, Harry carried the new rifle and Zara carried the Beretta, both empty and in need of attention before we loaded them. Only Bancoli and I carried fully loaded guns. I led the group and he brought up the rear. It was getting dark. Behind us in the distance, we could hear gunfire and the dull thunder of small explosions. Chapter 20. God is neither good nor evil, neither loving nor hating. God is power. God is change. We must find the rest of what we need within ourselves, in one another, in our destiny. Earthseed, The Books of the Living. Saturday, August 28, 2027. From Notes expanded Tuesday, August 31st. Today or tomorrow should be a rest day, but we've agreed not to rest. Last night was full of distant shooting, explosions, and fire. We could see fire behind us, though not in front. Moving on seems sensible in spite of our wariness. Then, this morning, I cleaned the little black earring radio and alcohol from my pack, turned the thing on, and put it in my ear. I had to relay what it said since its sound could not reach the others. What it said told us we should not only forget about resting, but change our plans. We had intended to follow US 101 up through San Francisco and across the Golden Gate Bridge. But the radio warned us to stay away from the Bay Area. From San Jose up through San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley, there's chaos. The quake hit hard up there, and the scavengers, predators, cops, and private armies of security guards seem bent on destroying what's left. Also, of course, pyro is doing its part. This far north, the radio reporters shorten the name to PRO or RO, and they say there are plenty of addicts. Addicts are running wild, setting fires in areas that the earthquake didn't damage. Bands of the street poor precede or follow them, grabbing whatever they can from stores and from the walled enclaves of the rich and what's left of the middle class. Yeah. In some places, the rich are escaping by flying out in helicopters. The bridges that are still intact, and most of them are guarded either by the police or by gangs. Both groups are there to rob desperate, fleeing people of their weapons, money, food, and water at the least. The penalty for being too poor to be worth robbing is a beating, a rape, and/or death. The National Guard has been activated to restore order, and I suppose it might, but I suspect that in the short term, it will only add to the chaos. What else could another group of well-armed people do in such an insane situation? The thoughtful ones might take their guns and other equipment and vanish to help their families. Others might find themselves at war with their own people. They'll be confused and scared and dangerous. Of course, some will discover that they enjoy their new power, the power to make others submit, the power to take what they want. Property, sex, life. Bad situation. The Bay Area will be a good place to avoid for a long time. We spread maps on the ground, studied them as we ate breakfast, and decided to turn off US 101 this morning. We'll follow a smaller, no doubt emptier road inland to the little town of San Juan Bautista. Then east along State Route 156. From 156 to 152 to Interstate 5. We'll use I-5 to circle around the Bay Area. For a time, we'll walk up the center of the state instead of along the coast. We might have to bypass I-5 and go further east to State 33 or 99. I like the emptiness around much of I-5. Cities are dangerous. Even small towns can be deadly. Yet we have to be able to resupply. In particular, we have to be able to get water. If that means going into the more populated areas around one of the other highways, we'll do it. Meanwhile, we'll be careful. Resupply every time we get a chance. Never pass up a chance to top off our water and food. Waste nothing. But hell, the maps are old. Maybe the area around I-5 is more settled now. To reach I-5, we'll pass a big freshwater lake, San Luis Reservoir. It might be dry now. Over the past few years, a lot of things had gone dry. But there will be trees, cool shade, a place to rest and be comfortable. Perhaps there will at least be a water station. If so, we'll camp there and rest for a day or even 2 days. After hiking up and over a lot of hills, we'll need the extra rest. For now, I suspect that we'll soon have scavengers being driven north toward us from Salinas, and refugees being driven south toward us from the Bay Area. The best thing that we can do is get out of the way. We got an early start, fortified by the good food that we had bought at Salinas. some extra stuff that Bankole had wheeled in his cart, though we all chipped in to buy it. We made sandwiches, dried beef, cheese, sliced tomatoes, all on bread made from wheat flour, and we ate grapes. It was a shame that we had to hurry. We hadn't had anything that good tasting for a long time. The highway north was emptier today than I've ever seen it. We were the biggest crowd around, 8 adults and a baby, and other people kept away from us. Several of the other walkers were individuals and couples with children. They all seemed in a hurry, as though they too knew what might be coming behind them. Did they also know what might be ahead? What was ahead if they stayed on 101? Before we left 101, I tried to warn a couple of women traveling alone with kids to avoid the Bay Area. I told them I'd heard that there was a lot of trouble up there, fires, riots, bad quake damage. They just held on to their kids and edged away from me. Then we left 101 and took our small hilly road, our shortcut to San Juan Bautista. The road was paved and not too badly broken up. It was lonely. For long stretches, we saw no one at all. No one had followed us from 101. We passed farms, small communities, and shanties, and the people living in these came out with their guns to stare at us. But they let us alone. The shortcut worked. We managed to reach and pass through San Juan Bautista before dark. We've camped just east of the town. We're all exhausted, footsore, full of aches and pains and blisters. I long for a rest day, but not yet, not yet. I put my sleep sack next to Bankole's and lay down, already half asleep. We had drawn straws for the watch schedule, and my watch wasn't until early morning. I ate nuts and raisins, bread and cheese, and then I slept like a corpse. Sunday, August 29th, 2027. From Notes Expanded Tuesday, August 31st. Early this morning, I woke to the sound of gunfire nearby and loud. Short bursts of automatic weapons fire, and there was light from somewhere. Be still, someone said. Stay down and keep quiet, Zara's voice. She had the watch, just before mine. What is it? One of the Gilchrists demanded. And then, we've got to get away. Stay, I whispered. Be still and it'll pass. I could see now that 2 groups were running from the highway, the 156. One group chasing the other, both firing their guns as though they and their enemies were the only people in the world. We could only stay down and hope they didn't shoot us by accident. If nobody moved, accidents were less likely. The light came from fire burning some distance from us, not buildings. We hadn't camped near buildings, yet something was burning. It was, I decided, a big truck of some kind. Perhaps that was the reason for the shooting. Some group had tried to hijack a truck on the highway, and things had gone wrong. Now, whatever the truck was carrying, food I suspected, the fire would get it. Neither the hijackers nor the defenders would win. We would win if we would just keep out of the fighting. I reached over to feel for Bankole, wanting assurance that he was all right. He wasn't there. His sleep sack and his things were still there, but he was gone. Moving as little as I could, I looked toward our designated toilet area. He must be there. I couldn't see him, but where else could he be? Bad timing. I squinted, trying to pick him out, not knowing whether to be glad or afraid because I couldn't. After all, if I could see him, so could other people. The shooting went on and on while we lay still and quiet and scared. One of the trees that we'd camped under was hit twice, but well above our heads. Then the truck exploded. I don't know what exploded in it. It hadn't looked like an old truck, one of those that used diesel fuel, but it might have been. Would diesel fuel explode? I didn't know. The explosion seemed to end the gunfight. A few more shots were exchanged, then nothing. I saw people, visible in the firelight, walking back toward the truck. Sometime later, I saw others, several together in a bunch, moving away toward the town. Both groups were moving away from us, and that was good. Now, where was Bankole? In a low voice, as I could manage, I spoke to the others. Can anyone see Bankole? No answer. Zara, did you see him go? Yeah, a couple of minutes before the shooting started, she answered. All right. If he didn't come out soon, we would have to go looking for him. I swallowed, tried not to think about finding him hurt or dead. Is everyone else all right? I asked. Zara? I'm fine. Harry? Yeah, he said, I'm okay. Travis? Natividad? We're all right, Travis said. What about Dominic? Didn't even wake up. That was good. If he had, his crying would have gotten us killed. Allie? Jill? We're okay, Allie said. I sat up, keeping my movements slow and cautious. I couldn't see anyone or hear anything beyond insects and the distant fire. When no one shot me, others sat up too. Where noise and light had not awakened Dominic, his mother's movement did the trick. He awoke and began to whimper, but Natividad held him, and he quieted. But still, no Bankole. I wanted to get up and go look for him. I had two mental images of him, one of him lying wounded or dead, and one of him crouching behind a tree holding his own Beretta 9mm. If the latter was true, I could scare him into shooting me. There might also be other people out there with ready guns and frayed nerves. What time is it? I asked Zara, who had Harry's watch. 3:40, she said. Let me have the gun, I said. Your watch is almost over anyway. What about Bankole? She passed both the watch and the gun over. If he isn't back in 5 minutes, I'm going to go look for him. Wait a minute, Harry said. You aren't going to do that by yourself. I'll go with you. I almost said no. I don't think he would have paid any attention if I had, but I never spoke the word. If Bankole were injured and conscious, I would be useless the moment that I saw him. I would be lucky to drag myself back to camp. Someone else would have to drag him back. Thank you, I said to Harry. 5 minutes later, he and I went first to the toilet area, then around it, searching. There was no one, or rather, we could see no one. Still, there might be other people around, others camping overnight, others involved in the shooting, others prowling. Still, I called Bankole's name once aloud. I touched Harry as a kind of warning, and he jumped, settled, then jumped again as I said the name. We both listened in absolute silence. There was a rustling off to our right, where there were several trees blotting out the stars, creating a space of impenetrable darkness. Anything could be there. The rustling came again, and with it a whimper, a child's whimper. Then Bankole's voice. Olamina. Yes, I answered, almost limp with relief. Here. He came out of the pool of darkness, a tall, broad shadow that seemed bulkier than it should have been. He was carrying something. I have an orphaned child, he said. The mother was hit by a stray bullet. She just died. I sighed. Is the child hurt? No, just scared. I'll carry him back to our camp. Will one of you get his things? Take us to his camp, I said. Harry collected the child's things, and I collected the mother's and searched her body. Between us, we gathered everything. By the time we finished, the little boy, perhaps 3 years old, was crying. That scared me. I left Harry to push the dead woman's pack along in her baby carriage, and Bankole to carry the whimpering child. All I carried was the gun, drawn and ready. Even when we got back to our own camp, I couldn't relax. The little boy wouldn't be quiet, and Dominic joined him with even louder cries. Zara and Jill worked to comfort the new child, but he was surrounded by strangers in the middle of the night, and he wanted his mother. I saw movement over near the burned-out carcass of the truck. The fire was still burning, but it was smaller now, burning itself out. There were still people near it. They had lost their truck. Would they care about a crying child? And if they did care, would they want to help the kid or just shut its mouth? A lone, dark figure came away from the truck and took several steps toward us. At that moment, Natividad took the new child and, in spite of his age, gave him one breast and Dominic the other. It worked. Both children were comforted almost at once. They made a few more small sounds, then settled down to nursing. The shadow figure from the truck stood still, perhaps confused now that it was no longer guided by noise. After a moment, it turned and went back past the truck and out of sight. Gone. It couldn't have seen us. We could look out of the darkness under the trees that sheltered our campsite and see by firelight, by starlight, but others could only follow the baby noise to us. We ought to move, Allie whispered. Even if they can't see us, they know we're here. Watch with me, I said. What? Stay awake and watch with me. Let the others get a little more rest. Trying to move in the dark is more dangerous than staying put. All right, but I don't have a gun. Do you have a knife? Yeah. That will have to be enough until we get the other guns clean and ready. We've been too tired and in too much of a hurry to do that so far. Also, I don't want Allie or Jill to have guns yet. Not yet. Just keep your eyes open. The only real defense against automatic rifles is concealment and silence. A knife is better than a gun now, Zara said. If you have to use it, it'll be quiet. I nodded. The rest of you try to get a little more rest. I'll wake you at dawn. Most of them lay down to sleep, or at least to rest. Natividad kept both children with her. Tomorrow, though, one of us would have to take charge of the little boy. We didn't need the burden of such a big child, one who had reached the run around and grab everything stage. But we had the little boy, and there was no one to hand him off to. No woman camping alongside a highway with her child would have other relatives handy. Olamina, Bankole said into my ear. His voice was low and soft, and only I reacted to it. I turned, and he was so close that I felt his beard brush my face. Soft, thick beard. This morning, he combed it more carefully than he combed the hair on his head. He has the only mirror among us. Vain, vain old man. I moved almost by reflex toward him. I kissed him, wondering what it would feel like to kiss so much beard. I did kiss the beard at first, missing his mouth by a little in the dark. Then I found it, and he moved a little and slipped his arms around me, and we settled to it for a little while. It was hard for me to make myself push him away. I didn't want to. He didn't want to let me. I was going to say thank you for coming after me, he said. That woman was conscious almost until she died. The only thing that I could do for her was stay with her. I was afraid that you might have been shot out there. I was flat on the ground until I heard the woman groaning. I sighed. Yeah. And then rest. He lay down next to me and rubbed my arm, which tingled whenever he touched it. We should talk soon, he said. At least, I agreed. He grinned. I could see the flash of teeth and turned over and tried to sleep. The boy's name was Justin Rohr. His dead mother had been Sandra Rohr. Justin had been born in Riverside, California just 3 years ago. His mother had gotten him this far north from Riverside. She had saved his birth certificate, some baby pictures, and a picture of a stocky, freckled, red-haired man who was, according to a notation on the back of the photo, Richard Walter Rohr, born January 9th, 2002, and died May 20th, 2026. The boy's father, only 24 when he died. I wondered what had killed him. Sandra Rohr had saved her marriage certificate and other papers important to her. All were wrapped in a plastic packet that I had taken from her body. Elsewhere on her, I had found several $1,000s and a gold ring. There was nothing about relatives or a specific destination. It seemed that Sandra had simply been heading north with her son in search of a better life. The little boy tolerated us all well enough today, although he got frustrated when we didn't understand him at once. When he cried, he demanded that we produce his mother. Allie, of all people, was his choice for substitute mother. She resisted him at first. She ignored him or pushed him away. But when he was not being wheeled along, he chose to walk with her or demanded to be carried by her. By the end of the day, she had given in. The two of them had chosen each other. She used to have a little boy, her sister Jill told me as we walked along State 156 with the few other walkers who had chosen this route. It was empty. There were times when we could see no one at all, or when, as we headed east and north, the only people we could see were heading west and south toward us, toward the coast. She called her little boy Adam, Jill continued. He was only a few months old when he died. I looked at her. She had a big, swollen purple bruise in the middle of her forehead, like a misshapen third eye. I don't think it hurt her much, though. It didn't hurt me much. When he died, I repeated. Who killed him? She looked away and rubbed her bruise. Our father. That's why we left. He killed the baby. It cried. He hit it with his fist until it stopped. I shook my head and sighed. It was no news to me that other people's fathers could be monsters. I'd heard about such things all my life, but I'd never before met people who were so clearly their father's victims. We burned the house, Jill whispered. I heard her say it, and I knew without asking what she wasn't saying. But she looked like a person talking to herself, forgetting that anyone was listening. He was passed out drunk on the floor. The baby was dead. We got our stuff and our money. We earned it. And we set fire to the trash on the floor and the couch. We didn't stay to see. I don't know what happened. We ran away. Maybe the fire went out. Maybe he didn't die. She focused on me. He might still be alive. She sounded more scared than anything else. Not hopeful or sorry. Scared. The devil might still be alive. Where did you run from? I asked. What city? Glendale. Way down in LA County? Yeah. Then he's more than 300 miles behind you. Yeah. He drank a lot, didn't he? All the time. Then he'd be in no shape to follow you even if the fire never touched him. What do you think would happen to a drunk on the highway? He'd never even make it out of LA. She nodded. You sound like Allie. You're both right, I know. But I dream about him sometimes, that he's coming, that he's found us. I know it's crazy, but I wake up covered in sweat. Yeah, I said, remembering my own nightmares during the search for my father. Yeah. Jill and I walked together for a while without talking. We were moving slowly because Justin demanded to be allowed to walk now and then. He had too much energy to spend hours sitting and riding, and of course, when he was allowed to walk, he wanted to run all around, investigate everything. I had time to stop, swing my pack around, and dig out a length of clothesline. I handed it to Jill. Tell your sister to try harnessing him with this, I said. It might save his life. One end around his waist, the other around her arm. She took the rope. I've taken care of few 3-year-olds, I said, and I'll tell you, she's going to need a lot of help with that little kid. If she doesn't know that now, she will. Are you guys just going to leave all the work to her? Jill demanded. Of course not. I watched Allie and Justin walking along, lean, angular woman and pudgy bumblebee of a child. The boy ran to investigate a bush near the roadside, then, startled by the approach of strangers, ran back to Allie and hung on to the cloth of her jeans until she took his hand. They do seem to be adopting each other, though, I said, and taking care of other people can be good cure for nightmares like yours, and maybe hers. You sound as though you know. I nodded. I live in this world, too. We passed through Hollister before noon. We resupplied there, not knowing when we would see well-equipped stores again. We had already discovered that several of the small communities shown on the maps no longer existed, had not existed for years. The earthquake had done a lot of damage in Hollister, but the people hadn't gone animal. They seemed to be helping one another with repairs and looking after their own destitute. Imagine that. Chapter 21. The self must create its own reasons for being. To shape God, shape self. Earthseed, the Books of the Living. Monday, August 30th, 2027. There is still a little water in the San Luis Reservoir. It's more fresh water than I've ever seen in one place. But by the vast size of the reservoir, I can see that it's only a little compared to what should be there, what used to be there. The highway runs through the recreational area for several miles. That gave us a chance to travel through on the road until we spotted an area that would make a good rest day camp and that wasn't occupied. There are a lot of people in the area, people who have set up permanent camps and everything from rag and plastic tents to wooden shacks that look almost fit for human habitation. Where are so many people going to the bathroom? How clean is the water in the reservoir? No doubt cities that use it purify the water when it reaches them. Whether they do or not, I think it's time for us to break out the water purification tablets. Around several of the tents and shacks, there are small, ragged gardens, new plantings, and remnants of summer vegetable gardens. There are a few things left to harvest, big squashes, pumpkins, and gourds still growing along with carrots, peppers, greens, and a little corn. Good, cheap, filling foods. Not enough protein, but perhaps the people hunt. There must be game around here, and I saw plenty of guns. People wear holstered handguns or carry rifles or shotguns. The men in particular go armed. They all stared at us. As we went past, people stopped their gardening, outdoor cooking, or whatever to stare at us. We had pushed ourselves, had been eager to arrive ahead of the crowd I believe will soon come in from the Bay Area. So we didn't arrive with the usual human river. Yet, by ourselves, we are enough of a crowd to make the local squatters nervous. They let us alone, though. Except during disaster-induced feeding frenzies like the ones after the earthquake, most people let one another alone. I think Dominic and Justin are making it easier for us to fit in. Justin, now tethered to Allie's wrist, runs around staring at the squatters until they make him nervous. Then he runs back to Allie and demands to be carried. He's a cute little kid. Lean, grim-faced, people tend to stare at him. Not one shot at us or challenged us as we walked along the highway. No one bothered us later when we left the highway and headed into the trees toward what we thought might be a good area. We found old campsites and toilet places and avoided them. We didn't want to be within sight of the highway or of anyone else's tent or shack. We wanted privacy, not too many rocks to sleep on, and a way of reaching the water that didn't put us too much on display. We looked for over an hour until we found an isolated old campsite, long abandoned and a little higher upslope than others we'd seen. It suited all of us. Then, with hours of daylight left, we rested in enormous comfort and laziness, knowing that we had the rest of today and all of tomorrow to do almost nothing. Natividad fed Dominic, and the two of them drifted off to sleep. Allie forwarded her example with Justin, although preparing him a meal was a little more complicated. Both women had more reason to be tired and to need sleep than the rest of us, so we left them out when we drew lots for a watch schedule. One for day and night. We shouldn't get too comfortable. Also, we agreed that no one should go off exploring or getting water alone. I thought the couples would soon start going off together, and I did it, and I thought it was just about time for Bankole and me to have that talk. I sat with him and cleaned our new handgun while he cleaned the rifle. Harry was on watch and needed my gun. When I went over to give it to him, he let me know that he understood exactly what was going on between Bankole and me. "Be careful," he whispered. "Don't give the poor old guy a heart attack." "I'll tell him you are worried," I said. Harry laughed and then sobered. "Be careful, Lauren. Bankole is probably all right. He seems to be, but well, yell if anything goes wrong." I rested my hand on his shoulder for a moment and said thank you. The nice thing about sitting and working alongside someone that you don't know very well, someone you'd like to know much better, is that you can talk with him or be quiet with him. You can get comfortable with him and with the awareness that you'll soon be making love to him. Bankole and I were quiet for a while, a little shy. I sneaked glances at him and caught him sneaking glances at me. Then, to my own surprise, I began to talk to him about Earthseed. Not preaching, just talking, testing, I guess. I needed to see his reaction. Earthseed is the most important thing in my life. If Bankole were going to laugh at it, I needed to know now. I didn't expect him to agree with it or even to be much interested in it. He's an old man. I thought he was probably content with whatever religion he had. It occurred to me as I spoke that I had no idea what his religion was. I asked him. "None at all," he said. "When my wife was alive, we went to a Methodist church. Her religion was important to her, so I went along. I saw how it comforted her, and I wanted to believe, but I never could." "We were Baptists," I said. "I couldn't make myself believe either, and I couldn't tell anyone. My father was the minister." I kept quiet and began to understand Earthseed. Began to began to invent Earthseed, he said. "Began to discover it and understand it," I said. "Stumbling across the truth isn't the same as making things up." I wondered how many times and ways I would have to say this to new people. "It sounds like some combination of Buddhism, existentialism, Sufism, and I don't know what else," he said. "Buddhism doesn't make a god of the concept of change, but the impermanence of everything is a basic Buddhist principle." "I know," I said. "I've done a lot of reading. Some other religions and philosophies do contain ideas that would fit into Earthseed, but none of them are Earthseed. They go off in their own directions." He nodded. "All right, but tell me, what do people have to do to be good members of an Earthseed community?" A nice door-opening question. "The essentials," I answered, "are to learn to shape God with forethought, care, and work, to educate and benefit their community, their families, and themselves, and to contribute to the fulfillment of the destiny." And why should people bother about the destiny, far-fetched as it is? What's in it for them? A unifying, purposeful life here on earth, and the hope of heaven for themselves and their children. A real heaven, not mythology or philosophy, a heaven that will be theirs to shape. "Or a hell," he said, his mouth twitched. "Human beings are good at creating hells for themselves, even out of richness." He thought for a moment. "It sounds too simple, you know." "You think it's simple?" I asked in surprise. I said it sounds too simple. It sounds overwhelming to some people. I mean, it's too straightforward. If you get people to accept it, they'll make it more complicated, more open to interpretation, more mystical and more comforting." "Not around me, they won't," I said. "With you or without you, they will. All religions change. Think about the big ones. What do you think Christ would be these days? A Baptist? A Methodist? A Catholic? And the Buddha. Do you think he'd be a Buddhist now? What kind of Buddhism would he practice?" He smiled. "After all, if God is change, surely Earthseed can change. And if it lasts, it will. I looked away from him because he was smiling. This was all nothing to him. I know, I said. No one can stop change, but we all shape change, whether we mean to or not. I mean to guide and shape Earthseed into what it should be. Perhaps, he went on smiling. How serious are you about this? The question drove me deep into myself. I spoke, almost not knowing what I would say. When my father disappeared, I began, it was Earthseed that kept me going. When most of my community and the rest of my family were wiped out and I was alone, I still had Earthseed. What I am now, all that I am now, is Earthseed. What you are now, he said after a long silence, is a very unusual young woman. We didn't talk for a while after that. I wondered what he thought. He hadn't seemed to be bottling up too much hilarity. No more than I'd expected. He had been willing to go along with his wife's religious needs. Now he would at least permit me mine. I wondered about his wife. He hadn't mentioned her before. What had she been like? How had she died? Did you leave home because your wife died? I asked. He put down a long, slender cleaning rod and rested his back against the tree behind him. My wife died 5 years ago, he said. 3 men broke in, junkies, dealers, I don't know. They beat her, tried to make her tell where the drugs were. Drugs? They had decided that we must have something that they could use or sell. They didn't like the things that she was able to give them, so they kept beating her. She had a heart problem. He drew in a long breath and then sighed. She was still alive when I got home. She was able to tell me what had happened. I tried to help her, but the bastards had taken her medicine, taken everything. I phoned for an ambulance. It arrived an hour after she died. I tried to save her and then to revive her. I tried so damned hard. I stared down the hill from our camp, where just a glint of water was visible in the distance through the trees and bushes. The world is full of painful stories. Sometimes it seems as though there aren't any other kind, and yet I found myself thinking how beautiful that glint of water was through the trees. I should have headed north when Sharon died, Bankholi said. I thought about it. But you stayed. I turned away from the water and looked at him. Why? He shook his head. I didn't know what to do, so for some time I didn't do anything. Friends took care of me, cooked for me, cleaned the house. It surprised me that they would do that. Church people, most of them, neighbors, more her friends than mine. I thought of Wardell Parish, devastated after the loss of his sister and her children, and his house. Had Bankholi seen some communities Wardell Parish? Did you live in a walled community, I asked. Yes. Not rich, though, nowhere near rich. People managed to hold on to their property and feed their families, not much else. No servants, no hired guards. Sounds like my old neighborhood. I suppose it sounds like a lot of old neighborhoods that aren't there anymore. I stayed to help the people who had helped me. I couldn't walk away from them. But you did. You left. Why? Fire and scavengers. You too? Your whole community? Yes. The houses burned, most of the people were killed. The rest scattered, went to family or friends elsewhere. Scavengers and squatters moved in. I didn't decide to leave. I escaped. Much too familiar. Where did you live? What city? San Diego. That far south? Yes, as I said, I should have left years ago. If I had, I could have managed plane fare and resettlement money. Plane fare and resettlement money? He might not call that rich, but we would have. Where are you going now? I asked. North, he shrugged. Just anywhere north or somewhere in particular? Anywhere where I can be paid for my services and allowed to live among people who aren't out to kill me for my food or water. Or for drugs, I thought. I looked into his bearded face and added up the hints I'd picked up today and over the past few days. You're a doctor, aren't you? He looked a little surprised. I was, yes. Family practice. It seems a long time ago. People will always need doctors, I said. You'll do all right. My mother used to say that. He gave me a wry smile, but here I am. I smiled back because looking at him now, I couldn't help myself, but as he spoke, I decided he had told me at least one lie. He might be as displaced and in distress as he appeared to be, but he wasn't just wandering north. He wasn't looking for just anywhere he could be paid for his services and not robbed or murdered. He wasn't the kind of man who wandered. He knew where he was going. He had a haven somewhere, a relative's home, another home of his own, a friend's home, something, some definite destination. Or perhaps he just had enough money to buy a place for himself in Washington or Canada or Alaska. He had had to choose between fast, safe, expensive air travel and having settling in money when he got where he was going. He had chosen settling in money. If so, I agreed with him. He was taking the kind of risk that would enable him to make a new beginning as soon as possible, if he survived. On the other hand, if I were right about any of this, he might disappear on me some night. Or perhaps he would be more open about it, just walk away from me someday, turn down a side road and wave goodbye. I didn't want that. After I'd slept with him, I would want it even less. Even now, I wanted to keep him with me. I hated that he was lying to me already, or I believed he was. But why should he tell me everything? He didn't know me very well yet, and like me, he meant to survive. Perhaps I could convince him that he and I could survive well together. Meanwhile, best to enjoy him without quite trusting him. I may be wrong about all this, but I don't believe I am. Pity. We finished the guns, loaded them, and went down to the water to wash. You could go right down to the water, scoop up some in a pot, and take it away. It was free. I kept looking around, thinking someone would come to stop us or charge us or something. I suppose we could have been robbed, but no one paid any attention to us. We saw other people getting water in bottles, canteens, pots, and bags, but the place seemed peaceful. No one bothered anyone. No one paid any attention to us. A place like this can't last, I told Bankole. It's a shame. Life could be good here. I suspect that it's against the law to live here, he said. This is a state recreation area. There should be some kind of limit on how long you can stay. I'm certain that there should be. Used to be. Some group policing the place. I wonder if officials of some kind come around to collect bribes now and then. Not while we're here, I hope. I dried my hands and arms and waited for him to dry his. Are you hungry? I asked. Oh, yes, he said. He looked at me for a while, then reached for me. He took me by both arms, drew me to him, kissed me, and spoke into my ear. Aren't you? I didn't say anything. After a while, I took his hand, and we went back to camp to pick up one of his blankets. Then we went to an isolated little spot that we'd both noticed earlier. It felt natural and easy to lie down with him and explore the smooth, hard, broad feel of his body. He kept himself fit. No doubt walking hundreds of miles in the past few weeks had burned off whatever fat that he'd been carrying. He was still big, barrel-chested and tall. Best of all, he took a lot of uncomplicated pleasure in my body, and I got to share it with him. It isn't often that I can enjoy the good side of my hyperempathy. I let the sensation take over, intense and wild. I might be more in danger of having a heart attack than he is. How had I done without this for so long? There was an odd, unromantic moment when we both reached into crumpled clothing and produced condoms. It was funny because of the way it hit us both at once, and we laughed. Then went on to the serious business of loving and pleasuring one another. That combed and trimmed beard that he's so vain about tickles like mad. And with that, we will resume in 2 weeks.